Hello, it's Paul Mount here with a quick book review for you guys. A book which has just come out this week called I Am the Master. It's called Legends of the Renegade Time Lord. It's published by BBC Books. It's just available in hardback, and it's a collection of 5 short stories and 1 novella featuring the Doctor's best enemy, the Master, who of course first appeared in the series back in 1971, played by Roger Delgado, who passed away in 1973. So the character was eventually recast in 1980, where he was played by Anthony Ainley, who carried on playing the role until the series ended in 1989. And then when Doctor Who was resuscitated in 2005, Russell T Davies eventually brought him back, played by John Sim, and Stephen Moffat reinterpreted the character as Missy, played by Michelle Gomez. And more recently, Sacha Dhawan, who is pictured on the cover of the book, took over to appear as the Master in season 12 of Doctor Who, which aired earlier this year. So what we have here, as I say, is 5 short stories and 1 longer form novella. And as usual with short story collections, it's a sort of a mixed bag, but they're all pretty entertaining. And I read it in 2 or 3 sittings. And I think there is, as I say, something for everyone here. The stories are written by some names who are quite familiar to Doctor Who fans and the Doctor Who community. We have one called Anger Management by long-time fan and Who book writer Peter Angelides, The Dead Travel Fast by Mark Wright, Jacqueline Rayner, who has written and writes, I think, for Doctor Who magazine, has written the Missy story. Master of Disguise is written by Mike Tucker, who's a special effects model work expert who did a lot of stuff for Doctor Who towards the end of its original run, and some work on the modern series. Somebody called Beverly Sanford has written The Night Harvest, and Matthew Sweet, the interviewer and academic and writer, you probably know him from the long form interviews he does on the Doctor Who Blu-ray sets, where he's done long interviews with the likes of Peter Davison and Tom Baker and so on. He's written the novella story. It's a good selection of stories, to be fair. Like I say, there are a bit hit and miss. I mean, inevitably for me, as somebody who didn't like Missy, the Missy story doesn't work. I just found that irritating, because Jacqueline Rayner, to be fair, has captured that sort of snappy sort of dialogue that she was given, but I didn't like that version of the character. I found it irritating and overly comedic, and that tends to be the case here. But we have some very good stories. The Roger Delgado story is called Anger Management. That's quite a clever story by Peter Angelides, in which the Master, the original Delgado version, as I say, is trapped in another dimension by aliens who promise him his freedom only if he conducts a mission for them back on Earth by capturing 3 renegades from their society who've escaped the dimension. They have no knowledge of who they are, but he has to go back to Earth and get them back where they came from. The only way he can do that is by causing massive releases of sort of emotional energy. Quite a clever story. Pacey, runs along very well, and very well read, written, and very readable. One of my favourites though is The Dead Travel Fast. This is by Mark Wright. This is written from the perspective of Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, of course, and it's set in Whitby in I think it's 1870 or 1890, where Bram Stoker was holidaying in Whitby, waiting for his family to arrive and just formulating the ideas for his next book. And as he's walking along the beach one night, he finds the desiccated form of the Master, as played by Geoffrey Beevers in The Deadly Assassin in 1976, washes up on a beach along with a familiar grandfather clock. He does his best to look after him and sets him up in the churchyard, the fairly abandoned churchyard, and he helps him restore himself to an extent by giving him rodents and small animals that he can feast upon using their life essence. But things take a turn for the sinister when the Master decides he wants something a little more sustaining than a dead rat. And it's very well written. It's very evocative of the era it's written in, and it sort of suggests that the idea of Dracula came from the Master. But I did enjoy that. That was a nicely written piece. Then we have Jacqueline Rayner's Missy story, which, as I said, is just, I find it a bit irritating, but if you like that incarnation of the Master, you might find something there. Master of Disguise is by Mike Tucker. That's quite a clever little story, which sort of starts off with the Delgado Master, and then later on moves to Anthony Ainley's Master. And if you've ever wondered where in the series the Master has these elaborate disguises and masks and so on, this sort of goes somewhere towards answering that question. It is quite a clever little story of somebody who's kept in prison, who's creating these masks and disguises for the Master, and how he tries to get away from being imprisoned by the Master, if you like. It's quite clever. The Night Harvest by Beverly Sanford is the John Sim interpretation of the Master, where he is on another planet, finds himself inadvertently helping this society which is being exploited by intelligent plant life. The only problem with that story I felt is that the John Sim character doesn't come across particularly well. I think that the Master is a bit generically written. I think you'd have to know it was him. There's a few lines of dialogue you think I could hear John Sim saying that, but a lot of the time it is a bit sort of generic supervillain language. My favourite story, though, I think is The Master and Margarita. This is the long form story, the novella, written by Matthew Sweet. An interesting story that sort of parallels John Pertwee's Doctor in exile on Earth working for UNIT, because here the Master, and again quite cleverly, it sort of has the Master back within the timeline that we know him in the series. It's the Sacha Darwin version of the Master, although again it doesn't come across incredibly well. There's barely a description of him, and you can't really, it doesn't evoke the character in the way that you saw him on television earlier this year in season 12. But yeah, the story is that he's in Russia in the 70s or 80s working for a UNIT type Russian organisation that's investigating peculiar alien incursions and so on. And with the aid of another familiar, I won't call them an alien race, but there's a familiar creature from Doctor Who history which appears in the story as well. Loads of continuity references in this one. The others, not quite so much in terms of dropping in the continuity bombs that fans like so much, but Matthews indulged himself here with loads of references to the history of Doctor Who. And it's a nice, it's a really well written story, and it has the Master sort of becoming humanised, really, living in Russia, living and working in Russia for this organisation, and becoming involved in a strange sort of fungal organism that's causing some disruption. I'll say no more because it's quite a cleverly written story. Again, as I said, Sacha Darwin isn't particularly well evoked in the story, but it's a good story, and that sort of, I think it sort of overcomes that particular problem. A good book. I'd probably give it a 7 out of 10. I think that it does rely a little bit too much on the Master's propensity for tissue compression and his little device that shrinks people. That sort of happens in every story, and two of the stories do use the same sort of story point about the Doctor, which I won't go into here. But if you're looking for a nice easy read, as I say, I read it in 2 or 3 sittings. You can read a story at a time, and it's 320 odd pages, so it's not an exhaustingly long book. But it's a nice spin on the Doctor Who fiction, looking at a particular character from Doctor Who's history, and especially with the Master having been reborn very successfully, I think, this year by Sacha Darwin. I think it's an interesting idea, and all in all, generally the stories hold up quite well. It's available now, BBC Books, £12.99 in hardback. I'm sure you can pick it up cheaper than that online in various retailers. But yeah, recommended. A nice little stocking filler for the Doctor Who fan in your life. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and see you again soon.